Disclaimer: I am not associated with this madman, but I do take some responsibility.
For years now I have obtained all this knowledge into my grand library, and I wish to share this story, or, in my case, the history of the ICU. The Interdimensional Combat Unit is a military organization set up by the Interdimensional Council after the ignition of the Third Human-Furry War, and the resulting split caused by this conflict. Previously, peacekeeping units from all corners of the dimensions would come together to ensure a fragile ceasefire between the many factions in the Council. First, I need to explain the Interdimensional Council, because you are probably wondering what the Council is. Dimensions, doors, etc. Dimensions are different worlds, realms, and universes linked together by the very fabric of space and time. You can move between the dimensions through dimensional doors and through open portals, though this is not usually recommended. And there is almost always a dimensional door, always at least one. You can imagine what happens with this ease of travel. With every step you pretty much encroach on someone else's dimensional property. Time goes on, and tragically, as the wild west of dimensional travel gets increasingly organized, factions and groups, ideologies and ideas expand and come in contact with each other. This is the part when I get on to the first human-furry war. The Imperium of Man. Have you heard of them? Well, some space marines stumbled onto their dimensional door, and after presumably screaming at it for not announcing its loyalty to mankind, they realized that the door was not actually sentient. At least I don't think they are, and they had wasted some 50 or so bolt rounds shooting the thing. Furry then stepped through the door, and to condense a lot of violence, bloodshed, and comedic miscommunication, started the first human-furry war. Raids into each other's territories started, whether it be based in the 21st century, or living its existence in a world full of magic and adventure, or even a futuristic sci-fi space shooter. Pretty much every setting and realm that has heretical species was raided, destroyed completely, or lucky enough to be under the wing of a patron. The humanist side of the first war was mainly just the Imperium of Man panicking at the dire selection of anthropomorphized foxes, wolves, dogs, and horses while spamming the heresy button. Other factions on the humanist side also had a bone to pick with the furry side, although their reasons spanned from earlier conflicts to petty arguments on the Bluebird. Now, the story on the other side of the war is a little less clear. You could say that they banded together and fought the perceived invaders off, but there's also evidence of a lot of infighting and backroom shenanigans going on. Unfortunately, due to the quick expansion by the humanist side, the furries pretty much book-burned most of their records, which is just such a tragedy. Not the war, by the way, that's a comedic tragedy. Maybe an action movie if you stretch it, but the records and the books and the literature they burned to ash? I would have killed for those books. It's always amazing to read such records and diaries and the likes. I'm sure if I smuggled my way into their cities, maybe I could steal some books from the libraries. It's too much effort. I know they had it hidden after the first war. They probably wouldn't let an absolute stranger and a criminal in. I will always put myself within your walls. I could be anyone, anywhere. Your bookcase is not safe. Go ahead, P. I will find a way to pillage your libraries and read your most personal of parchments. What am I talking about again? Ah, yes, my audio tape. You know, I'm trying to modernize my collection, but only recently did I own my very own computer. Could finally use these flash drives I stole from all those other people. Okay, so I've covered the first human-furry war, and there's a third one raging on, albeit smaller in scale. So what's the second one all about? Well, the second one was much like the first one, but far less involved in world building, and far less involved by the Imperium of Man, with only one chapter of Space Marines volunteered to the war. You may know them as the Black Templars, but that's neither here nor there. In the end, it wasn't the constant screaming from the Interdimensional Council that ended the war, nor the victory from either side that won the war for their side, but instead, a lawsuit. More so, a legal decree that ended the Imperium's expeditions into other worlds. With their marine chapters called back and the legions of foot soldiers being pulled off to deal with internal threats, the armies on the run, the space navies no longer gave fire support and fear, but instead acted as guards and convoy escorts for a last-ditch evacuation. Nobody won this war. It was a huge waste of time. But one group remained. The Black Templars. They were left behind in the evacuation. Some say on purpose, to carry out the Emperor's will, while others say that the bureaucracy of the Imperium was so caught up with evacuating the major assets that they forgot about this particular chapter. Others say that the monoliths chose to save the Black Templars from their fate if they ever returned to their home dimension. Whatever it may be, they roamed the dimensions, carrying out the will of the Emperor in exile. So ends the Second Human Furry War, and the Interdimensional Council could breathe a sigh of relief as the members could work on rebuilding trust between the two groups, and all the other groups that ended up in other wars. A peacekeeping effort was remade to stop any more wars and conflicts from happening again, to stop the suffering, and, by now, there's a refugee crisis at hand. People whose dimensions had become battlegrounds, fields of slaughter, were flooding into other dimensions, causing chaos and confusion. And soon, a need to home these displaced peoples came to pass. And it was up to the intern on level C, room 427, cubicle 67, ID tag 420DB2, to figure out a decades-long crisis. In return, he was given a 6 times pay raise, but 6 times 0 is still 0. He devised a plan. Hubworlds, as he called them, would help to settle the displaced peoples. He was given a budget of 20,000 USD to explore different building styles and cities. And unfortunately, along the way, he came across Los Angeles, California, and thought to himself, yes, this is good, and based the hubworlds around the cities of America, dimension 1492DB. He sent his plan to the Interdimensional Council, and to everyone's surprise, it was accepted and put into place and completed in just a few months. It appears the Interdimensional Council knows more about the dimensions than they let on, but I digress. So, the hubworlds were made, peace was established, and a general sense of calm in the dimensions was there for the first time in a while. So raised its head a third human furry war. The third human furry war is still ongoing, and despite its smaller scale, it has caused an uproar in the interdimensional community. Peacekeeping efforts have gone out the window, and nothing is holding this truce together. So aside from those few dimensions now in total war between humans and furries, and the Imperium man not being known to have any involvement in this conflict, it appears the war has started out of nowhere. And no one, and I mean nobody, has gotten any information on this conflict. Dimensional doors into that region has just stopped working. Instead, just showing a JPEG of an annoying frog, which it just sucks. Since I myself cannot enter or find much information on the war itself, I'll talk about the human furry war's end here. But a theory is being floated around about a group of individuals that are behind the war, and that they are solely responsible for this war. One of their kind was apparently left behind, and the rest are still running hog wild. The ICU were organized just before the war, and they could only station a garrison in one of the dimensions. As far as I'm concerned, they're as good as dead. But that's all I know about that detachment of ICU troops. So basically, the ICU is an organization set up by the Interdimensional Council because the factions in the Council could no longer cooperate with each other reliably, as if they could ever do that. If we wanted to focus solely on the first military operation of the ICU, that would be Operation Lucifer, an ill-fated insertion into Hell to hunt down an interdimensional anomaly. This is blatantly untrue. I actually know what happened because I was there. Let me explain. So, I have this habit of, to put it lightly, crowbarring myself into different places, causing chaos and such. This is common with my counterpart as well. He does the same thing, except he gets paid for it. I, however, am not held to such financial incentive. Instead, I go to different dimensions for the stories and the people and the books to store in my grand library to document, research, and discover. Unfortunately, people do not like it when I barge into their homes, their workplaces, and their military bases. I ask for their documents, diaries, and secret blueprints, but they always refuse. So I come back home, soaked in blood, with a pile of books to organize. Recently, I've been using a disguise kit I looted off a dead Frenchman near the docks to pseudo-stealth my way past the crowd. It's been very effective, much quieter than me barging in with a cubic meter of TNT and a broadsword. Except in this case, I was actually just sightseeing, and in just 5 minutes, they're already running. Some towards me, some away from me, and I'm pretty sure one of them was trying to call in a bomb squad, but that's not important. What's important is that I chose the wrong disguise. Instead of cloaking myself into one of the local inhabitants, I chose a monolith, which subsequently started a chain reaction. Probably didn't help that I was flying around spraying graffiti on one of the high-rises. Not a good look, but I've done worse. And then I dipped back into my realm, leaving thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands in the city, confused and panicking. Another interdimensional traveler probably got some footage of me trending on the Bluebird, and so the Interdimensional Council set in the ICU. The intervention was a disaster, and halfway throughout the invasion, harsh house-to-house fighting, low morale amongst the troops, and the tactics shown on this battle report looks like a match from Men of Valor Hero Company killed the invasion. Wait a minute. The Dimension's Interdimensional Council representative, Vienna Madredo, hearing of this invasion, was absolutely livid, and called for an end to the invasion in the Council ASAP. The ICU agreed to stop fighting and pulled out. It turns out their pull-out game is absolutely terrible. The ICU agrees to stop fighting and pull out. The evacuation order came after several hours of fighting. Out of the 6 armored spearheads, only 1 managed to reach their objective. 4 were all but operationally destroyed, and the 6th spearhead was left behind. The 29th Assault Division, 81st Infantry Division, and the 12th Independent Armor Corps were all sent in. About 25% of the number were left behind and are legally considered MIA. Most were torn apart by the angry locals or escaped by the skin of their teeth. So, that was Operation Lucifer. But I'm still not done! After that disaster, the ICU basically became useless and would have been disbanded, liberating the clone soldiers from a lifetime of servitude and bloodshed, but that did not happen. Remember those hub roads? Well, since then the intern died. Stress and a tough divorce did him in. His remains are buried in a park somewhere in a hub road, but also the refugees settled in, and immigration to the hub roads have spiked. It's not very common to see a multicultural, multi-species dimension like the hub roads last. And as such, plenty of jobs to go around, and plenty of opportunities means plenty of people. On one particular night, I wandered around and invited myself. I don't discriminate whose bookshelf I borrow from or whose party I violently crash, but when there's a furry to the left of you and a joker to the right, you don't really stop to wonder whether or not it was you who got yourself into this mess. It totally was me. I don't do pre-planning. So to the streets the furries went, demanding safety, legal stuff, and the less specious and corrupt police force. Look, I'm not too big on politics. If I ever had to speak to any one of these people, it would have been too soon. Anyways, back to the history. The local police force gave up, and the protesters and counter-protesters stared each other down in the streets. The local ICU garrison was sent in to stabilize the situation. At this point it had not descended into a riot, into a full-blown street war. But that would soon change, because of me, again. I wanted to document what was happening, and went into the thick of it disguised. They pushed me to the front, and they eventually came across a police line set up by the ICU. As the protesters started singing chants, the soldiers spotted me trying to leave the scene. My disguise didn't seem to have an effect on these troopers, and he immediately opened fire on me. He missed and shot the ringleader. A brawl soon started, and riots showed clashed with makeshift clubs. Tear gas and Molotovs were thrown indiscriminately, and bullets from assault rifles and concealed carbines were fired into the crowd. I slipped away in the chaos. The harbors were soon put under martial law. Riots, shootings, and lootings took place, and the harbors were in complete chaos. Gun sales increased significantly within a week. Militias fought against looters, ICU troopers, and street gangs, and overnight the city was on fire. Whoops! After the riots, a cultural commission was put in place to educate troopers on the customs of different races and groups, and so far the results have been tangible at best. A lot of ICU troopers have deserted or mutinied. Some are working as mercenaries, while others have defied all expectations and have started relationships and families with the citizens of the hub worlds, putting greater pressure on a way for ICU troopers to be discharged without having to risk their necks for it. Most of the military police units stationed on the hub worlds have been hit by widespread apathy and mental stress. Troopers being beaten by gangs and killed in targeted assassinations have also made the IC troopers more cruel and prejudiced to the people they are meant to protect. But most ICU troopers are still loyal to the organization, if not to their fellow trooper. Whether it be carrying a wounded soldier on a stretcher during Operation Lucifer's evacuation, to sleeping in a troop carrier while the city around them burned itself to the ground. This has been the story of the ICU so far. But it is a story that is expanding itself. There are several organizations that are rumored to be on the hit list of the ICU, such as the Universal Strike Force, the infamous Black Paw, and the League of Genshin, as well as other several individuals. One day, I will research their entire being, because I have some evidence to suggest that they are fundamental